That was a great session. Thank you, everyone on that panel. I thought that was excellent. Now we are here to talk about our favorite topic, quality. We have a really great panel of panelists. That joke never gets old for me. This is my panel here. They're real, they're authentic, and they're in research. So if anyone wants to research this panel, they can. Okay, so I'll do a little introduction. The way this session's going to go, there's going to be a 10-minute talk from each of them around their area of quality. We have people representing technology and panels. And they'll have 5 minutes of questions after each talk that they give. There's microphones that are set up here. If you want to come up and ask a question, feel free. It's an open forum. So today we have with us Adam Deitrich from Paradigm Sample. Over the past decade, Adam has sat on every side of the sample ecosystem. He began his career in market research, aggregating panel, working with over 150 different sources across the globe. He moved into academic research, where he worked with leading institutions and helped develop a data quality tool that directly interacts with panelist experience. Today, he is the VP of Insights, Panel Insights at Paradigm, where he helps guide the proprietary sample and member strategy with a focus on innovation. He's also a longtime advocate for online polling and co-hosts the Research Innovation Discussion Exchange podcast. I think we've all seen him very active on LinkedIn. He's an excellent member of the research community. We have Labe Lightman. He is the co-founder and chief research officer of CloudResearch. His current research focus is online research methodology, including the development and validation of tools for the acquisition of more trustworthy and usable data on online platforms. Leib is an associate professor of psychology at Lander College, so if you have any problems, feel free to talk to him later. Leib received his PhD in environmental psychology and was a postdoctoral fellow and research scientist in cognitive neuroscience at NYU. His early research was focused on implicit learning and relationships between conscious and unconscious information processing. He authored Conducting Online Research on Amazon Mechanical Turk and Beyond 2020, part of the SAGE Innovations and Methodology series. Okay, great. So now we'll introduce Ben. Ben is Verasight COO and co-founder. He co-founded Verasight in 2020 with his former Cornell political science professor, Peter Enns. Verasight's mission is to democratize access to high-quality data by building innovative methods to help organizations understand voters and consumers. I don't know that anyone will ever understand voters and consumers. Verasight's clients include government agencies, academic research, and investors. Ben's recent work has been featured in Forbes, The Hill, and the LA Times. He began his career at Goldman Sachs and graduated from Stanford Graduate School of Business as an R.J. Miller Scholar. Last but not least, Ms. Kerry Hecht, EchoMR CEO and founder. Kerry is the CEO and founder of Echo Market Research, and she has been in the business for over 25 years. She has global experience across a wide range of brands and sectors with a record of success of proven leadership, relationship, and business growth skills. Echo was established in 2017 as a response to gaps in the industry around project management, participant sourcing, and all the fun things about trying to get people into surveys. Echo and Kerry are highly invested in creative problem solving, emerging technologies, and new and interesting methodologies. So up first, we're going to have Adam come up and give us a little chit-chat about his experience in the space.
Thank you, Sandy. I'll do my best for a little chit-chat, as you say. But today, I'm going to focus on time, and I got to make sure that we've got, there we go. Today, I'm going to focus on time, and we can all agree that 10 minutes certainly isn't going to be enough of it to solve the quality dilemma. I mean, we do have some pretty smart people here, so maybe not, but please go easy on me and my fellow panelists as we kick off this discussion. 10 minutes also may not be enough time to really determine the quality of a panelist, right? I think there's quite a few mentions of that in the previous group. And because of that, I'm going to focus on the opportunity and really the responsibility that panels have to not only help alleviate the inflow of bots, frauds, and all the different bad actors that plague our industry, but also help systematically reduce them in the long term. All too often, we place a lot of the emphasis and really the pressure to determine a respondent's quality based on quick technical checks like IP address registry, digital fingerprinting, and the like, as the respondent enters a survey. And then also, if we're lucky, with those good end clients, we have terminating red herrings and things like that in survey as well. But both of those types of protection are obviously vital, and that's why they've been around since the onset of the online research industry. But they're also longitudinally last in a series of opportunities that we have to identify fraud along the way. And if, long story short, if the source at the top of the funnel is chock full of shady characters that may never even come back to participate, there's really only so much lipstick you can put on the pig. And that's not a joke about all of us that frequently pass out piggy banks at conferences, because that's something that panels love to do. But a single survey experience is also a very limited amount of time to make an assessment on quality compared to a panel's multiple touch points with a respondent through the journey of recruitment, verification, profiling, inviting them to a survey, and then incentivizing them. Each one of these steps allows the panel the opportunity to further validate a respondent's credibility with things like active email checks, address verifications, SMS check-ins, things like that, and the aforementioned tech and red herring questions that are so important. Long story short, the more time that panels get with a respondent, the more likely they are to pass a security check from Sentry, from Imperium, from Research Defender, and Clean ID. I think I got all of you guys. Or to ace a well-crafted red herring 10 minutes later in the survey. But that's really just a micro view of the issue at a study level. On a bigger scale, panels have to decide if we want to take ownership, to be vigilant and add more security to each of these interactions while walking the tightrope of unencumbered user experiences to try and reduce the bad actors and stop making these panel discussions an annual occurrence at conferences like this. I realize that saying panels taking responsibility for the quality of their members is a pretty obvious stance to take, and I promise I'm getting to what we believe are the next generation answers to solving the data quality dilemma. But it's important to take a snapshot of market research today from a respondent's perspective, just like the first panel mentioned. The problem is that ongoing relationships with panelists, the ones where we have the opportunity to verify and validate them longitudinally over and over again, are the exact opposite of the trend amongst our industry. Everyone in attendance today believes that anonymous internet users can provide a representative sample of the wider population and be entrusted to shape those multi-million-dollar business decisions we just heard about. But all too often, those interactions come in between things like trying to get a new life on Angry Birds, or after you fill in a review of a survey of a local online diner online. And then we don't see you again until you come back when you need another life in Angry Birds, or we pass you around from router to router across different surveys until you finally qualify. And it may be a great example of ResTech, right? It may be a good example of ability to widen the pool, to increase that supply that we just heard about. But what does it do for us long term? Is it sustainable? Ryan Barry just asked, what will panelists look like 5 years from now? And the question that I want to ask is also, what does it make potential respondents think of us, right? So that's why our approach to improving data relies on creating relationships and trust by engaging panelists on a more frequent basis. Tellwood is our consumer-facing community under the Paradigm umbrella, whose design is to create an engagement experience that competes with all of the different time stealers, time wasters, whatever we want to call them, across the internet. Rather than throwing ads up on Facebook and Instagram, we've created our own, albeit smaller, social network where users create content and interact by voting on and commenting on member-created surveys on a range of topics. Our members have profiles, usernames, and avatars just like Twitter or Reddit. And sure, sometimes, as you can see here, behavior can devolve in the similar way that it does on Reddit or on Twitter or any social media aspect. But it can also be a depiction of humanity. We've had members that started book clubs together, that have created support groups for one another during the pandemic. And we even have a married couple that met on Tellwood, which is something I'm proud of. When we did a recent internal poll of members about their experience on the platform, we found that users are still highly motivated by incentives, of course. But over half the group said that participating in member-created surveys was at least important to their experience. We talk a lot about the commoditization of the survey world and the declining incentives that have followed, but users don't know market research trends. They just want an authentic experience in the time that they do give us. In fact, members placed more emphasis on their interactions than they did on the number of paid surveys available to them at any given time, right? So I have one poll quote here from user Linda Jack. She said, "I really like that members can post their own surveys. Some are quite interesting and surprisingly creative, in fact, and that we can earn a few points for participating in those." Another fifth of the group valued the ability to comment on results of those interactive surveys. I could share open ends all day, and some of them will sound like blurbs of YouTube fights and Twitter comments and things like that. But Katie just said, that she worries about TikTok and Twitter in terms of who her competitors are. And for us, that's kind of the point. Those types of interactions need to be the competition for the new panel world, places where users feel compelled to engage. Another positive side effect that we have of enhanced engagement is becoming, instead of being more siloed, is that we become a part of members' daily routines. This user, who you can see on screen here, she has been a member since 2018, has completed our survey of the day, internal member surveys, and external surveys on average about 5 times per week for almost 4 straight years. She has commented on other members' creative surveys over 300 times, which doesn't even reward her any incentive at all. And yet she persists. Every morning, there's MagSmart 220 for 30 minutes doing internal and external surveys. Each of these logins, and there are thousands, creates a ledger of technical and browser data that we and habits and quality validations like red herrings, honeypots, and physical address verifications for her to test products and receive incentives. And by providing an experience that draws members like MagSmart 220 back, panels can access thousands of data points unavailable in a 10-minute survey and create that trust that the first panel was discussing. Then, if there are concerns along the way, whether it be an in-survey check or a pre-survey technical check, we have more data than anyone else to fight back against them. This is particularly relevant today as we see things like VPNs, people working from home, and triggering more flags and creating kind of more unforeseen circumstances than we ever imagined when it comes to data quality and some of our technical defenses. The next step for panels to solve the data quality problem is to stop guessing where research participants are going to be, how they want to be invited, or how they want to be incentivized, is to build relationships and work in synergy with what makes participants tick. A recent deep dive into our community showed that people of different ethnicities, age ranges, certainly incomes, have different motivations for participating. That's why we're building out more hyper-individualized options, particularly for high-value and underrepresented groups to participate in more research instead of another hour-long scroll through Instagram. Again, that's our competition. It's about taking faces in a crowd, like you see here, and using the opportunity of time to start tailoring a better experience to them so that MagSmart 220s of the world who like taking a survey over morning coffee always have an invite delivered at 7 a.m., options for rewards from her favorite brands, and even customizations to her page, just like she would get on a Twitter page. And this can't just be a PR exercise so that we can show up at SampleCon next year and present on how we built a Gen Z panel, offering them Spotify gift cards, TikTok dance lessons, and selfie sticks, right? It's about giving them a trustworthy, personalized experience that feels fair, interactive, and collective. So in turn, they'll give us more of that ever-competitive time. So to close, solving the data quality dilemma requires serious attention at every level. It's at the panel, the pre-survey check, and in-survey. It's a longitudinal, holistic series of assessments that will systematically reduce the number of bad actors that plague the survey ecosystem. It isn't sexy, there isn't a silver bullet. But panels have a unique advantage in the amount of time we get to spend with each member before they get to our clients. I'm hoping that between this panel and all the smart people in this room, we'll find a way to start using that time in a better manner. As Steve just said, it's the people that matter, right? The people in these panels. So because rather than continuing the trend of transactional first dates, why not ask more of panels and push them to provide a user experience that one of us would actually like to participate in? Thank you.
Please.
So what do you think with respect to quality and sort of the survey design and how that impacts the panelist experience as well as quality? Like, do you have some thoughts around that at all?
Yeah, sure. I think, is my mic on? Okay, great. There's only so much we can control. I'm not going to go as far as a member up here before to say we're totally screwed or a different word. But we can control what we can control, right? If you just think of yourself as a panel manager, why not make every second you get with them a better experience, right? It's in some ways a return back to basics, right? When 20 years ago we were trying to get people to join a panel and they didn't have a concept of taking a survey online or anything like that, I think it was almost an easier sell because now so many people have been burnt, right? They've had shitty online survey panel experiences and things like that. So I think it starts with controlling what we can control, and then taking the advice of everybody else, previously up on stage here, and trying to work our way up the funnel to make it better at each step.
So at InnovateMR, we have a panel, and we have a tool called Text Analyzer, and we have all kinds of checks and balances even at the recruitment stage. Mm-hmm. And I sometimes wonder what the panelists think about the quality measures. On our text analyzer, someone wrote in, actually, when we had the question, they go, you just want to make sure I'm not a robot. Mm-hmm. What do you think about the panelists and what they go in and think about around the actual checks? And we're asking them things over and over.
Right, and I think that's why panels have an opportunity, because when they're at the reward stage, right, or the profiling stage, it's different than answering for the 10th time, like Katie was mentioning, what their gender is, right, as they're bouncing around router to router. So I think there's an opportunity there because we're getting them in a time when they are more engaged, right, because they're just about to cash that gift card or whatever it may be, right? That's a great time to confirm somebody's physical address or validate them on SMS. And granted, they've probably already participated in surveys, right? So that's why it has to be kind of a longitudinal factor. But I think the other part of it too is, like you said, nobody wants to answer the question 100 times over, so let's go upstream.
I think that what you guys are doing as far as changing it from a flat panel experience where it's really just a one-sided communication of you receive an email, you take a survey, and turning it into the community has to be the wave of the future, right? So when the panel previously was talking about how when they have their panel and it's branded, mm-hmm. they treat them one way. But when it's a panel that is either unbranded or someone is renting the people from a panel company, mm-hmm. and they treat them a totally different way. And that's wacky, mm-hmm. right? And so I think that we who spend a lot of time in the community space know a lot of great tools and tips and tricks for engagement and getting them to come back for the sake of just communicating about something topically. Mm-hmm. And that technology exists within, whether it's your proprietary software or community software or a combination of community software and panel management software. And so why we would just throw everything we know about how to treat people out the window just because we don't, own that person is really beyond me. So I think what you guys are doing, that looks awesome. Thanks.
We're excited. And again, it's not necessarily, it's going back to basics more than it is anything else. Like I had a colleague that wanted me to say, like, you should call it like the sample golden rule and that closing line about like treat people how you want to be treated. And like that's a little hokey and cheesy, but it's also the God honest truth, right?
Yeah. So I'm gonna say that, so.
Steal it.
Were you invited to the wedding?
We were not, actually. We were not, sadly.
Thank you. I think we'll go on to the next one. So we have Leib here to chit-chat about technology, and technology really, I would say, overseeing and managing and ensuring that, we do everything we can no matter how we do it, and blocking out the nefarious responder.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I'm Labe Lightman. I'm the co-founder and chief research officer at CloudResearch. And today, I'll be talking about one of the most important issues that the online research community is currently grappling with, and that is how to overcome low quality data. Now, over the last 15 years, online opt-in panels have increasingly taken center stage as the leading providers of information for our society. There are at least 1 billion surveys being completed every year, and probably a lot more. And the information gleaned from these surveys informs our society, science, medicine, and business. But over 30% of surveys are completed fraudulently, and this fraud leads to a tremendous amount of misinformation. Now, fraud comes from a variety of different sources, and some of them include click farms and bots. But a lot of fraud actually comes from real people who are simply disengaged, uninterested, and are trying to earn rewards. And I will start today with a quick dramatization, shall we say, of a disengaged respondent to illustrate my point.
Come on, what are you doing? Get him! God, I don't even know why I play with you. I thought you said you were good. Score! Another one.
Man, I'm making bank off these surveys. You should be doing this too.
I don't care. And submit.
Game over.
Dang it! All right, let's go again.
All right, so this video showed a respondent who's obviously, doesn't care about the survey, he's not reading the survey questions, and he's just willing to say yes to pretty much anything just to qualify for the survey. And this video is maybe just a tad bit overdramatic, but it is actually not too far from how many people actually fill out surveys in real life. Now, there was a recent study conducted by the Coalition for Advanced Sampling Excellence, or CASE, that attempted to quantify just how prevalent online fraud really is. And this large-scale study looked at data quality from thousands of respondents from multiple panels, and the results of the study were presented recently at a Insights Association town hall meeting, and there were hundreds of people present, maybe some of you were there as well, and we actually have Efrain Ribeiro and Tia Maurer right here. In the front row, who were the lead authors on this study. So I hope I get the details right. And I think it's great they're here for the whole conference. I think if any of you want a deeper dive on the study, you should certainly come and talk to them. Now, the overall results of the study found that over 30% of the data needed to be removed from the sample because it was either fraudulent or the data were of really low quality. And bad data included things like gibberish open ends and nonsense responses, including making impossible claims. For example, some people said that they went to the opera at the height of COVID, right? And of course, at that time, all opera houses were closed. And so these data raise a very important question, which I think all of us are addressing here today. What can be done to reduce the prevalence of this type of fraud? Now, the case study looked at this question as well by testing some of the most common fraud protection services to see how much of this bad data they were able to remove. Now, these currently widely used approaches of protecting surveys work primarily at the level of the device. And what I mean by that is that prior to allowing a respondent to take a survey, they check for things like digital fingerprints and IP duplication and CAPTCHA. Now, the study found that these approaches identified some of the bad data, but they also found that a lot of the bad data, and in most cases, most of the bad data, were actually left in the survey. And in particular, close to 25% of the sample was still providing bad quality responses even after this type of protection was used. And this brings us to the first main point of this talk, which is that a good device fingerprint does not necessarily equal a good respondent. The vast majority of bad data doesn't come from a blacklisted device or from a commonly used IP address. It comes from real people, like our gaming friend over here, who are trying to earn as much money as possible and are often completely disinterested and disengaged. And these are often people who have also figured out how to get around some device blocking technology. Now, of course, device level protection is important because some of the fraud does come from bad devices. But the way we think about it at CloudResearch is that device level protection is necessary, but it is not sufficient to ensure high quality data. And this brings me to the main point of this talk, which is that what other approaches are there to protect surveys against bad data? And the answer to that is, we think, behavioral assessment. Now, behavioral assessment uses validated and standardized instruments that allow us to create transparent behavioral standards to help separate good respondents from bad respondents. And today I want to talk about what behavioral assessment is and how it can help to improve data quality. Now, at CloudResearch, we see behavioral assessment as involving two primary components. The first is what we call response-based vetting. And this involves asking respondents a set of questions that help us to better understand their state of mind and their dispositions. But we care not just about what answers the respondents provide, but also how those answers are made. And so the second component is what we call behavioral tracking. And behavioral tracking automatically monitors on-screen behaviors for problematic and suspicious events while the participants are answering their questions. So what are the key behavioral components that we can measure that correspond to high-quality survey data? Now, there are really a lot of them, and there are more of them that I'm able to talk about in just 10 minutes. But some of the most important ones are here on the slide, and they are language comprehension, which is just the ability of the person to speak the language of the survey at a basic level, attentiveness, honesty, and whether participants are who they say they are. Now, we at CloudResearch built a system based on these principles, and we call the system Sentry. And I want to share with you some of the fascinating things that we see when we use Sentry to actually track the behavior of respondents as they start their survey. Now, in addition to standard device level protection, Sentry presents a few questions to respondents before they start their surveys. And while participants are answering these questions, Sentry tracks on-screen behavior using what we call an event streamer that automatically flags suspicious events. So I'm going to play some live recordings of participants going through Sentry, and these recordings come from actual respondents who are about to enter a survey and who had already passed all device level tests. And in the recordings I'm about to play, we're first going to focus our attention on just the behavioral tracking component, and after we look at the behavioral tracking, we're going to come back to look at how validated question libraries map onto the response-based assessment goals. Okay, so here in this video, you will see, you're seeing actually two respondents who automatically translated the survey out of the language that it was intended to be in. The event streamer automatically detects when a respondent translates questions into a non-survey language indicated by the red bars on the bottom of the screen. So the first respondent translates the survey into Arabic, and the second respondent translates the survey into Chinese. And we see people translate questions into numerous languages like this. And this behavior is common from people who are fraudulently posing as US-based respondents in order to qualify for more surveys. And in some cases, we see B2B studies in their entirety that are completed by respondents from all over the world who are using this kind of translation device. Now, tracking doesn't just detect translations. It captures many aspects of respondents' behavior, including things like going off the screen and suspicious mouse and keyboard movements, which can be interpreted by machine learning algorithms trained to recognize behaviors that are associated with bad survey data. Okay, now let's focus on the response-based assessments and how they can be implemented by turning our attention to the questions that are being asked. Now, the questions come from large dynamic libraries that are updated by automation and domain expertise. And I'll talk about the first library, where the first question that you're seeing here is an example of a question that measures the respondent's language comprehension and attentiveness. So to generate these questions, which we call association questions, we mapped out the relationships between all high-frequency words in the English language, and this allows us to have a vast library of stimuli to make sure that no participants see the same stimuli within or between studies. And we have these questions in over 20 different languages and are expanding to many others. Okay, now, but just because a person speaks the language of the survey and are attentive does not mean that they are a good respondent. They also have to be answering the question honestly. And to detect honesty, we have several other large libraries. And so, for example, here, we're asking a respondent whether they're able to do something that is completely impossible, to remember everything that happened to them before they were 2 years old. And we have a huge percentage of respondents who will say yes. And the reason why they say yes to these things is because they're trying to get into a survey, so they're telling the researcher what they think they want to hear to allow them to enter the survey. And finally, the fourth goal is to determine whether participants are who they claim to be. And this is a particular problem in B2B studies where there's a lot at stake and there's more motivation to cheat and pretend to be someone that you're not. Now, our approach for these kinds of B2B studies is to identify the basic experiences or knowledge that all who are in a particular demographic group share, and to create large libraries of questions to validate who they are. For example, let's say we are conducting a B2B study and we want to sample nurses. Now, it's fairly easy to sample nurses from many online sample providers, but how do we know that these people who are claiming to be nurses actually are who they claim to be? And so to demonstrate this, I'm going to once again show you some screen grabs from recordings in Century. And again, these respondents are passing all device level tests and claiming to be nurses. So what you're seeing here is a first question in a set of 4, and it asks about blood pressure of 230/50 and how that should be categorized. This particular respondent thinks that this is a normal reading. Now, either that person is not a nurse or they're not a nurse that anyone would want to visit, because every single nurse knows that 230/150 is a hypertensive crisis. Here's another example where we're asking a person what it means to provide medication QID. Now, again, every single nurse knows that that's 4 times a day, but this respondent thinks that it's 2 times a day. And overall, we find that real nurses will get all 4 out of 4 Century questions correctly. However, in online surveys, our research shows that over 30% of people who are claiming to be nurses will get at most 2 out of 4 questions correct, and many of them get 1 and many of them get none. We see the same kind of pattern across B2B categories, including IT professionals, financial decision makers, and all the types of B2B categories that we typically care about. So overall, behavioral analysis allows us to set transparent goals and to create scalable and validated solutions to improve our ability to detect problematic respondents. But most importantly, we think that the behavioral approach that I just outlined is a generalized solution. And that kind of generalized solution can be improved by improving better AI technology for detecting events that correlate with bad data quality, for expanding the types of libraries that we use, for making those libraries more scalable, and for making these stimuli available in ever more languages. And these are some of the things that we at CloudResearch are currently working on to improve our ability to combat with survey fraud even further. Finally, I just want to take this opportunity to say that we are very happy at CloudResearch to announce that we have just partnered with Innovate to work on improving data quality online. This partnership comes on the heels of a very large test of Century that went over a period of 6 months on over 1 million respondents. And we found, the research team at Innovate found that this kind of a behavioral approach was able to improve data quality at a very high level and to reduce reconciliation rates. And we look forward to our continued partnership with Innovate to make this even more effective. And so in conclusion, we at CloudResearch believe that behavioral-based approaches are the next important phase in improving our effectiveness at fighting survey fraud. And I thank you for your attention.
Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? Wow, you made it just on 15 minutes, spot on. Okay. Ben, feel free to take the stage.
Thank you, everyone. I think I'm on. Am I on? I'm on. Beautiful. My name's Ben Leff. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Verasight. It's my first SampleCon, so amazing to be here. Excellent choice of location. I've been to a lot of nerdy data conferences, and Pasadena takes the gold. A little on Verasight. So I founded Verasight 2 years ago with Peter K. Enns. I think the founding story is entertaining. He was my political science professor at Cornell about 10 years ago. I was the weirdest student in his class, sat in the front row all the time. Office hours, Peter just wanted to relax. I would be there and asking him data questions. So about 2 years ago, I convinced Peter there's a whole world outside of academic articles. Let's build a panel together. There are cool conferences in Pasadena that we can go to. And Peter thankfully said yes. So that's the origin of Verasight. We build a panel that primarily leverages address-based sampling and online recruitment. We primarily serve government institutions and academic researchers. And today, one aspect of data quality that I want to touch on is accuracy, which is really hard because there are very few areas where we can test accuracy. But in this presentation, I'm going to look at two of them, the 2020 election and COVID vaccination rates, because they're somewhat known truths of outcomes that we can benchmark survey data to. And when I talk about combining recruitment methods, what I mean is, how is the panel built? And so what our team did for this research presentation is we looked at 3 ways that panels can be built and sample can be recruited. The first way is probability recruitment. You're probably familiar with random digit dialing or address-based sampling. When I first heard of address-based sampling, I thought that meant snail mail, where you send surveys in the mail, 50-page survey, you expect people to send it back to you. What I quickly learned is that you can leverage technology to do address-based sampling. So what we do at Verasight, we randomly select addresses. They receive a postcard with a QR code or a website link. And depending on the day, the zip code the postcard is sent to, that person accesses a completely different survey. 2 people can scan the same QR code and be sent to different places based on what we know about them from the address. Non-probability sampling, that's most people in this room. That's opt-in panels online or finding people where they're spending their time online. And mixed sampling, which I think is really interesting, is combining the 2 approaches together, and can you build a high-quality sample that leverages the benefits of both of those approaches? So next, what do I mean by accuracy? And this is what I think is one key component of assessing data quality. So just as a reference of how weird and nerdy our team is, to do this presentation, we looked at more than 650 publicly available surveys and polls. We hand-coded each survey by looking at the methodology. Was the sample built using probability methods? Was it built using non-probability methods like opt-in panels? Or was it built using a combination of both of those approaches? And we did it for 2 use cases. First, the 2020 election. We know, or at least we think we know, that Biden won by 4.5 percentage points. And COVID vaccinations, because the CDC releases every week the percentage of Americans who are vaccinated. And we can use data from our surveys to get a sense of how close are surveys and polls getting to the CDC data to what is being publicly released. So let's dive into what we found. The first finding is that non-probability, so these opt-in online surveys, were more accurate than probability sampling in the 2020 election polls and as accurate in COVID vaccination polls. So what is particularly exciting is we presented this at the American Association of Public Opinion Research last week. It's a lot of people who come from working in phone centers and really old methods, and their jaws dropped. But what's fun about being in front of this crew is you're all at the forefront of innovative ways of sampling, and I think this is just a prime example of all the work you're all doing in terms of data quality. So what we see here is for 2020 election polls, and we're measuring error in terms of percentage point from the truth. Non-probability surveys were about 2.5 percentage points more accurate than probability-based polls. For COVID vaccination surveys, it turned out that both methods were about equal. So probability polls performed about as well as non-probability based sampling. And just for reference, it's important how expensive these probability polls are to run a $50,000 phone-based survey for an N of 1,000, and these online non-probability methods are getting better or equal results. So super exciting finding. The next finding, which is even more interesting, in my opinion, is that mixed methods were more accurate than both non-probability and probability methods combined. And again, what I mean by mixed methods is what if you combine the two approaches together? What if you build a sample and recruit individuals, some from probability-based approaches and other from traditional sort of opt-in panel-based approaches? And in that scenario, here's the same graph in terms of polling error for likely voters. It was the mixed methods that performed the best. They had the lowest overall error, with just about 1.3 percentage point error in terms of predicting the 2020 election likelihood. Now, one thing that was important to analyze was this result driven by outliers? Was it just a few polls? And what the answer was is no. For each of these polling types, for each of these sample and recruitment methods, the error was essentially normally distributed, which means the results were not driven by outliers. So two really interesting findings, just to highlight sort of the innovations and the effectiveness of opt-in, non-probability-based polling. So first, if you look at probability polls, all of the error is pro-Biden. So what that means is if you were looking at just phone polls, just address-based sample polls, you might have a false sense of confidence with how the election would end up. Whereas mixed methods and non-probability had an error that was more normally distributed in terms of the mean error being around 0. The second really interesting finding to us data folks is you might expect that the worst possible online poll would be worse than the worst probability poll. So the worst possible phone poll or $75,000 address-based sample poll. That was also not the case. The worst poll overall in terms of predicting the 2020 election was a probability-based poll. So again, super interesting finding in terms of looking at the distribution of outcomes in this case. So what that leads me to is why we at Verasight think mixed mode methods might be more accurate in terms of building a sample and recruiting panelists. We think mixed modes allow organizations to recruit different types of people. So address-based sampling, sending people postcards, an official-looking invitation to participate in a panel, might recruit the types of people who care more about an official-looking invitation. We heard at the earlier session, just this growing challenge in terms of recruiting Hispanic individuals or African Americans. One thing that's really interesting about address-based sampling is you can use the person's address and their name to do predictive modeling. How likely are they to speak multiple languages? How likely are they, based on first or last name, to be Hispanic or African American? And based off that, you can fully customize the invitation that goes to them. And that's just an example of some of the testing that we're continuing to do. Similarly, online methods might be interesting. Opt-in panels might attract a different form of person, people who are more interested in incentives, people who are playing games online and just might have surveys presented to them more frequently. And we think the beauty of mixed methods is you're able to bring these two groups of people together and do very interesting analysis in terms of who's composing this sample. So just some opportunities, recommendations, and opportunities for future research. So first, this is just looking at one form of analysis of how panels are built. I think everyone in this room has a myriad of recruitment methods in terms of how they're recruiting individuals into their panel. I think it's really interesting to continue to look at what are ways you can slice that data in terms of maximizing accuracy with known benchmarks. The second thing I want to highlight is this research is possible because pretty much everybody in this room has made a conscious effort to make their methodologies available, to make data available. We at Verasight archive all our non-client data at the Roper Center, so you can look at our data line by line. And like I said, pretty much everyone in this room has their methodology statements online. So just another plug that is super helpful for researchers, and it lets us do cool projects like we did today. So I had an absolute blast. I'm so excited to meet all of you and to hear your ideas for interesting ways to build panels and how we can, as an industry, continue to assess accuracy and improve accuracy moving forward. So thank you very much.
Does anyone have any questions before I ask them? Here we go.
Sorry, maybe I just missed this, but with the phone part of it, are you saying use the phone recruit, bring people into your online panel, or are you saying keep these two things separately and mix them as mixed modes? Like, so you're still doing part phone, you're still doing part online
Yeah,
separately?
no, it's a really good question, and we've actually seen both approaches work. So what we do is we'll invite people using the mail, but then they'll join an online panel and act like a traditional online respondent. Certain individuals, certain government customers, for instance, really care about that small percentage of people who still don't have access to the internet. And in that case, they'll do the mixed mode and still use the telephone to take the survey. What I think is really interesting, which is getting at your question, is you can use these methods like telephone, like the mail, to recruit people into a very traditional online panel. And then they behave and have the exact same experience that any online opt-in panelist would have. They were just recruited in a different manner and might behave slightly differently.
The big downside there is phone recruiting is outrageously expensive, so versus online recruiting. So then, we would need to see, obviously, the conversion rates of those phone folks be a lot higher, knowing they're gonna be maintained. I don't know, maybe for your industry, that's not as much of an issue from dealing with the government. They're spending more or whatever, but for polling. But that's just a big, I think a big deterrent for a lot of us, probably, as much as the quality is better. Again, we have to pass these kinds of expenses onto our clients, and they typically don't tend to be all that receptive. So just something to think about.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. Cost is the main driver, and I think it's really interesting is figuring out how much, if you wanted to combine methods, what percent truly needs to be from the phone or from address-based sampling, and it actually doesn't need to be as high as you might think. Like our work, it's typically 10% is from address-based sample, which provides the interesting benchmark, but it doesn't drastically increase price.
I have another question over here.
Big question, but this dialogue echoes back to, I started at Harris Interactive back when the internet was first emerging as a data collection technology, and we were on the front lines and people were doing the telephone and paper data collection, and we had to come up with creative ways to get representative populations with propensity weighting, where we were looking at, does this person that we got online behave and have the attitudes more of somebody that's offline? And it's just really like we're coming full circle in how we're looking at the respondents coming into our survey and who they're representing because of how we're sourcing them. So more of it, like I said, more of a comment, but an interesting look at how things have come around.
Totally, and then it's also really interesting, like even the people we're getting online, we're probably each using so many different ways to get those people online. So how are each subsect of just the online folks behaving differently?
Right. So it may be another technique to apply when you can't afford using things like telephone data collection, but looking at those attitudes and behaviors and coming up with ways to recognize what they're representing, these people. Yeah.
Totally.
Did you see a big difference in the actual, your data was spot on and that was great, or not too far off, but the quality of the actual respondents, like, did you note any variance between how they were behaving from each of the methods?
Yeah, so I think what's most interesting is the types of individuals you can recruit from different methods. So these postcards were actually quite effective with more rural audiences and actually more minority groups. because we were able to really tailor the invitation. And if you know the address, you know how likely is this person to speak Spanish, how likely is this person to speak Mandarin, and you can really customize the invitation. So that was a really interesting comparison. And then, you know, on the political domain, I think it's interesting. We tend to look at how panelists behaved in terms of when they were recruited to take surveys. And one thing we're really concerned about is non-random drop-off. So, you know, it's very hard to get Republicans and particularly pro-Trumpers to stay in panels. They tend to drop off more frequently. I have a theory that it's because all these academic research colleagues are sending so many questions their way. So another interesting comparison is if we're finding people in real time and it's their first survey, how is their behavior different than if they've been in the panel for a long time?
Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we will bring Kerry Hecht up to the stage from Echo.
Okay, so thank you everyone for staying around for the final bit of this. This is my second time on a panel at SampleCon, and it's wonderful to be here, as well as really wonderful to see everybody's faces. So as mentioned, my name is Kerry Hecht, and I'm the CEO and founder of Echo Market Research. We're a services company with a wide range of offerings, from providing people for communities, qualitative research and surveys, all the way to research design and analysis for both qualitative and quantitative. And while the title of this session is New Solutions to Tackle the Quality Dilemma, and I will talk about some solutions that we employ, I feel very strongly that we need to take a few minutes to talk through how we got here. And to be clear, and as the previous panel really focused on, by here I mean databases that are full of bots, liars, weirdos, and pros. So spoiler alert, I do not feel like database owners or panel companies are responsible for this mess, since databases quality is intrinsically linked to bad participant experiences, which can be due to tight timelines, tighter budgets, lack of transparency in the process, lack of evolution in research design, bad screeners, and last but not least, the paradox that we've created in asking people to join the database to make money and then being surprised that they actually want money or that they have gamed the system. So until we reconcile those things, no amount of tech to catch the liars, weirdos, bots, etc. will matter, because we won't be able to retain the regular people that we actually do want to speak to. So I'm one of those people that started in the market research industry as a teenager, and this counts as my 31st year in the industry. I started my career on the phones in a college town of Denton, Texas, back when there was no or few databases for surveys. It was around 1991, and in the old days, we compiled our surveys through what was then known as random digit dialing. So in 2022, I think we can all agree that spam phone calls are at best annoying, but there was a day when we cold called people, and with that we knew that the people we were reaching were, number one, actual people, and two, somewhat more representative of, actual real world folks. And, I could argue that point based on the amount of old ladies that I talked to, but, I digress. So we plugged area codes into the system, called folks, got hung up on a lot, and we verified the demographic info, conducted the screener, completed the survey, and without one penny for actual incentives. So around comes 1996 to 1999, and boom, we've got the internet. We also have cell phones and caller ID. What caller ID showed us was that when we gave people the option, they didn't really want to talk to us. So let me give you an example of why that might be. From memory, this is an advertising recall survey that we used to administer on the phone that we were now administering online, or at least this is a 10th of the actual 45-minute long survey. So what do you remember seeing about the advertisement? What do you remember hearing about the advertisement? What do you remember about the advertisement in general? Is there anything else you remember about the advertisement? Now, if you have a few more minutes, I have a few more questions about the advertisement. I'll leave this brandless, but I do remember who it was, and I've seen some of their surveys since, and it hasn't changed much. So, wake-up call. Bad experience equals bad database equals bad results. You get the point, right? This should have been the wake-up call that we needed to start thinking about the questions we ask, why we ask them, and the experiences we're giving the participants, but sadly, it wasn't. In fact, we still see screeners come across our desk today that start with, my name is blank and I'm calling from blank. And nobody calls anybody to do screening surveys anymore. So, it's rather shocking. And for years now, those of us on the supplier side have been trying to get clients or agencies to shorten their surveys, be transparent in the screening, make sure the surveys are mobile optimized, create participant feedback loops, and just generally be considerate. Consider that if you want real human beings giving quality and thoughtful responses, you should be giving them a quality and thoughtful experience. So we're in the early noughts. Random digit dialing is a thing of the past, and the internet is in most households. Screeners and surveys are primarily conducted online. The only direct outreach database owners do is to actually grow the database. We are pre-smartphone, but we are also pre-bot. In the qualitative world, we have people who are getting big bucks for focus groups, and we also have groups like the Learning Annex that are putting out actual classes on how to make a living doing focus groups. We expect these people to be topical experts, articulate, to have only taken part in one focus group in the past 6 months, and pretend like they haven't registered in every other focus group facility in the city they live. In the quant world, they're getting peanuts as incentives. Remember Peanut Labs? And to be honest, I can't really figure out what our industry expects from those folks. We're also seeing the rise of community software and services, which is a hybrid quant-qual methodology where we want quant numbers and qual quality, most often for quant prices. And this ends up shedding some light into some pretty dark corners of how our processes are producing terrible results, right? We've got 10% show rates, 5% completion rates. And even now, in 2022, I have conversations in the community world all the time where clients are completely satisfied with 10% participation rates. It's normal to them, it's what they expect. And although they're paying for the other 90%, and they're paying to both procure them and house them. So a project I personally supported around 2008 was over-recruited by 300%, and we still couldn't get the sample we needed to complete. So the panel company, who was actually my client in the moment, threw hundreds more dollars at the participants, and that still didn't work. And not to mention, if you think about it from a researcher standpoint, how can you plan your project if you don't know whether you're gonna have 20 people showing up or 1,000 people showing up that you have to moderate? I mean, it's just a nuts model. So fast forward to now-ish. Most, if not all, surveys and screeners are taken on smartphones. We have heaps of data about the impact of surveys that are too long, drop-off rates when the survey isn't mobile optimized. We have the rise of aggregate panel exchanges, bots who can beat our security systems, and very little actually effective QA. We have low quality, but we have low expectations. So these things match. So there's lots of better ways to go about this, in my opinion, and some of them are pretty, easy to use and don't really require a lot of effort or a lot of money. And when we started Echo, we started primarily supporting qualitative research, and I couldn't really wrap my head around why qualitative recruiting costs were so high, in fact, higher than they used to be, given that all the people came from a database, there was no direct outreach. They're emailed a screener, they're pre-qualified or terminated in that moment, and perhaps they get a rescreening phone call. So it's much more efficient than how things used to be. So we started playing with different sources, including panel companies, and figured that we would just add a few extra layers of vetting to make sure that people were qualified. To repeat, I'm not here to beat up on panel companies. I feel like our industry has vilified them, and wrongly so. Clients price shop, want absurd timelines. They don't want to provide the participants a good experience, pay them well. So how is it surprising that databases are full of, literal bots or people you wouldn't want to talk to? So again, having built the database around the idea that you should come here to earn money, but the increments are so small. So for anyone that is joining a database, it is in fact a volume game. I've heard more than one panel salesperson say that they have to accept the bad work from clients because the clients will just go somewhere else. And it's a really awful position for those kinds of companies, and it's not going to change until our industry holds all parts accountable for this problem that we share. So, I digress. We partnered with some panel companies for qualitative recruiting, and we'd get spreadsheet updates that we'd call, email, text, etc. to verify the people. 1 out of every 10 was actually correct contact information, but again, we were still getting charged for all 10 that completed the screener. So we started by embedding video questions in the surveys or the screening surveys. Above is an example of 1 woman, 1 project, 3 names, 3 email addresses. And I think, that makes the point. So when you've got these verification items built in, either they drop out, you'll see things like 90% drop-off rates, or you see them going in and just really trying to game the system. He had made the point about, the having the AI to understand when people are doing weird things. Another good example of this is if you're launching a survey in the United States and all of your completes come in the middle of the night in the United States, it's probably a clue that the people aren't the right people. So video also allows you to catch 45-year-olds posing as 14-year-olds, mothers dressing their 8-year-old kids up to make them look like they're 14 years old. And these are all things that we've actually seen, including ID verification where they've photoshopped the wrong font onto the ID, people photoshopping their body onto a car that they obviously didn't own. I mean, the things that you see are wild, but the tools are there to catch them. And there's also lots of tech companies and tech solutions out there. Some of them were speaking before. A lot of them are already embedded within the softwares that we use, like Qualtrics and other, survey software. You've got VoxPopMe. These things can be plugged in really cheaply at any point in the process to catch the folks that are going to do stuff like this. So when we embedded the video, we also started seeing, like I said, 90% drop-off rates. And when we went back to the panel partner that we were using, their response was, there's a problem with the tech. There wasn't a problem with the tech. And they still wanted to charge us for every person that dropped off at that screener. And I think that we should expect more, but also be willing to pay more for those expectations. So at least we knew that 10% of the people were the right people, and we knew that that they would and could talk about the topic that we needed them to. So that was exciting and felt like a step in the right direction. So all that said, the way that we at Echo find and vet people can and should change depending on the research methodology. For qual research, let's rescreen people by turning the entire screening survey into a series of open-ended questions. In my opinion, qualitative screeners should always and only be open-ended questions. The respondent has to write the answer to these questions, so it gives you a historical record that they're actually able to talk about it, and you can bounce that off of the original screener. There's additionally no way for them to game the system that way. And it's worth noting that the pros do understand the screening. They will actually say when asked that, well, you're trying to trick me, so why shouldn't I try to trick you? And someone's got to stop the shenanigans, and I'm guessing it's not going to be them. So also, what if they do participate in a lot of research? I brush my teeth, I love my cat, I drive a car, I can probably talk about all of those things reasonably well. And if it's IDIs or high-profile projects, get the participant to also submit an additional video articulation question. Make these things separate steps. If it's longitudinal research, whether it's longitudinal quant or qual, get them on the phone to make sure that they understand what they're signing up for. If it's a survey, always have that embedded video question. While you're creating your surveys, you can also embed video for the participants to watch, things that thank them for their time, tell them where they are in the process, let them know how much longer it's going to take. When you turn an experience into a fun one for them, they're not even they don't even realize that the survey is longer than you said it was going to be, just by making it an interesting experience. And as an industry, we have measured that more than one time. And ultimately, leverage the internet. We mostly source our people through an active recruitment model, which means we find them where they live online and are discussing the topic naturally, whether it's subreddits, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, TikTok, etc. But circling back to my original point, all that said, I cannot keep those real people coming back or from dropping out if the research we give them sucks to participate in. If it otherwise has no value to them as an experience, why would they complete it? So please, train your clients, push back on bad experiences, push back on bad and frankly poorly designed screeners and surveys, push back on no incentives, push back on lack of transparency, and ultimately we need to acknowledge this is a scenario we created and we only have the power to fix it. So what are we doing to fix it on our side? We are giving people more than one way to make money if they join our community. And we are removing the primary way of making money being surveys and focus groups. So we've got the technology to create communities. We're building a technology around turning this into a gig economy ecosystem. So if you join our database, you can make money by intercepting people in the street for hyper-localized recruiting. You can make money by referring people to projects. You only get paid after those people have completed the projects. If you can translate, you can make money by being a translator for us. You can make money through a whole bunch of different ways. And we're rolling this out globally with a target audience being 18 to 40 years old. They're digital natives. Their grandparents are alive. Parents are alive. Some of them have kids. Are they willing to refer us to their professional network? If you can get me your dentist, I'll give you $100. If you get me the cat lady, I'll give you $5, right? It also allows them to rate the projects they're participating in, and then the people that are using them for projects to rate them. So now we've got accountability going in both directions, which I think is important. So this, if you'd like, take a picture of it. I'm not gonna burden you with watching it now because I'm already over time, but it'll show you one of the places that we are launching our gig economy app and how we're going to be treating it differently than database growing. It's the sponsorship of a comedy festival in Las Vegas. So just take a minute, check that out when you have some time. And in summary, a huge part of tackling the quality dilemma, solving for bad participant experiences. That really, in my mind, foundationally comes down to that. Technology can't fix their problems with us. Flexible approaches based on what the study methodology is, objectives are, and client needs are. This is a win-win for participants and for clients. And databases aren't dead, they shouldn't be. But we do have the opportunity to rethink how we use that participant database. And if we should start using it as a resource for them, as well as a resource for the clients. And that be that.
Thank you.